funny thing about warnings, they don't arrive screaming the first time. They come softly, disguised as coincidence, as discomfort, as that uneasy feeling you keep laughing off. The second time feels familiar, the third feels intentional, and by the fourth it's not subtle anymore, it's patient. Patterns repeat. Doors close the same way. The same lesson wears different faces, and you still call it bad luck. But warnings aren't punishments, they're pauses, moments where you're supposed to stop pretending you don't see what's happening. Because when the same message keeps returning, it's not trying to scare you, it's trying to save you from yourself. Warnings escalate when ignored, because subtlety only works on people who pay attention. The first sign is always quiet, almost polite, like a knock you pretend you didn't hear, a feeling in your chest, a hesitation before a decision, a moment where something feels off, but not dangerous enough to stop you. You brush it aside because it doesn't interrupt your plans. You tell yourself you're overthinking. That's how the warning tests you, not with fear but with awareness. When it's ignored, it returns wearing repetition. Same situation, different face. Same discomfort, new excuse. You start noticing patterns, but you explain them away as coincidence. Because coincidence feels less demanding than responsibility. The second warning isn't louder, it's clearer. It asks you to connect dots you've been avoiding. Most people don't. They wait for drama, for something undeniable, because they believe truth has to hurt before it counts. So the warning sharpens. The third time it arrives, it disrupts the thing you care about. A loss, a delay, a conflict that mirrors the same lesson you refuse to learn quietly. Now it's not just a whisper, it's a pause. Life slows you down without asking permission. And still, some people don't listen. They blame circumstances, they blame others. They say timing is cruel, fate is unfair, anything except. Admitting the message has been consistent all along. Escalation doesn't mean anger, it means clarity. Each ignored warning removes another layer of softness. The message stays the same, but the delivery changes. What once came as intuition now arrives as consequence. What once felt optional now feels unavoidable. Not because mercy disappeared, but because patience has structure. There's only so many ways a lesson can introduce itself before it stops asking and starts showing. People misunderstand escalation as punishment. It's not. Punishment seeks pain. Escalation seeks attention. It's the difference between being corrected and being cut off from further warning signs. The system doesn't want to break you, it wants to wake you up. But waking someone who pretends to be asleep takes effort. The volume goes up when the listener refuses to hear. The danger of ignoring early warnings is that you train yourself to tolerate misalignment. You normalize discomfort. You start trusting familiarity over truth. The warning escalates because your tolerance has grown thicker than your awareness. What once would have stopped you now barely slows you down. So the message has to arrive stronger to reach you through the noise you've built around yourself. By the fourth time, escalation isn't dramatic, it's surgical. Something ends cleanly. A door shuts without explanation. An opportunity dissolves. A relationship collapses in a way that feels final. There's no confusion anymore. Just impact. The warning no longer asks for reflection, it enforces it. Not out of cruelty, but because reflection was postponed too long. Escalation also exposes pride. People believe they know better than the signs in front of them. They trust their desire more than direction. They think persistence will overpower misalignment. So escalation humbles without humiliation. It removes the illusion of control by showing you how predictable ignoring truth actually is. Warnings don't escalate randomly. Escalate proportionally to resistance. The more you justify, the more force is required to interrupt the pattern. Silence becomes loss. Hesitation becomes consequence. Intuition becomes reality. And by then, the message is impossible to misunderstand. Even if it's still difficult to accept, there's something uncomfortable about realizing the fourth warning didn't come suddenly. It was built slowly, patiently, through moments you dismissed. That realization stings because it removes the victim narrative. It shows you where choice existed and where it was avoided. Escalation doesn't remove choice. It exposes how many times it was ignored. The truth is, Escalation is a mercy with boundaries. It refuses to enable self-destruction indefinitely. It interrupts paths that would cost you more later. It trades small discomfort for larger protection. But it only works if you're willing to see the pattern instead of resenting the pressure. Warnings escalate because awareness didn't, because attention was misplaced, because comfort was chosen over correction. Each level exists to prevent the next. Each message is an invitation to adjust before adjustment becomes forced. And the fourth warning isn't louder because it's angry, it's louder because there is nothing left to whisper through, nothing left to soften, nothing left to repeat. Accept the truth you were always meant to notice. Your repeated patterns are deliberate signals, not accidents, not bad luck, not the universe running out of ideas. When the same situation keeps showing up wearing different faces, it's not confused, it's precise. It's checking whether you're paying attention or just reacting on autopilot. You call it coincidence because coincidence feels harmless, but patterns carry intent. They repeat because something inside you hasn't changed yet, and life has a strange habit of circling back until it gets acknowledged. The first time a pattern appears, it feels personal. Someone betrays you. An opportunity collapses. A choice backfires. You feel unlucky, wronged, misunderstood. The second time, it feels familiar. You notice the similarities but still tell yourself this one is different person, different timing, different excuse. That's how the signal tests your honesty. Are you actually observing, or are you just hoping the outcome changes without you doing anything differently? Patterns don't shout. They show. They recreate the same emotional response over and over until you recognize the common denominator. And that part makes people uncomfortable, because the common denominator is rarely external. Same disappointment, same type of person, same mistake, same ending. You start asking why this keeps happening to you, but the better question is why you keep walking into the same setup with new expectations. Deliberate signals are subtle because they respect free will. They don't force you to change, they invite you to notice. The repetition is the invitation. The discomfort is the underlying. And every time you ignore it, the signal doesn't disappear. It refines itself. It becomes harder to dismiss. The pattern tightens. The lesson sharpens. People like to believe growth is about adding things. New relationships, new opportunities, new environments. But patterns repeat even when everything changes on the surface, because the signal isn't about where you are, it's about how you respond. You can move cities, switch careers, meet new people, and still end up in the same emotional position if the internal script stays the same. Repeated patterns expose unconscious choices, the kind you don't think you're making because they feel automatic, who you trust too quickly. What behavior you excuse, where you stay silent, where you overextend, where you settle. Patterns reveal the habits that live beneath intention. They show you what you prioritize without realizing it. There's a reason patterns feel exhausting. It's not because they're unfair, it's because they're persistent. They don't allow denial to stay comfortable forever. Each repetition adds weight. Each cycle removes another excuse. Eventually, the pattern becomes impossible to ignore without actively lying to yourself. People often ask for signs, not realizing they're already drowning in them. A repeated pattern is the loudest sign there is. It's not symbolic, it's literal. Same message, same outcome, different context. And still, people wait for something dramatic, something catastrophic, something undeniable, because acknowledging a pattern means admitting responsibility for change. Patterns don't judge. They don't punish. They present evidence. They lay out data points and wait for interpretation. You can either see them as proof that life is against you, or proof that life is trying to redirect you. The difference isn't in the pattern, it's in your willingness to stop defending familiarity. Familiar patterns feel safer than unknown solutions. Even painful cycles provide predictability. You know how they end. You know how to recover. You know what to expect. Breaking a pattern means stepping into uncertainty without a script. That's why people stay trapped. Not because they don't see the signal, but because responding to it would require them to become someone they haven't practiced being yet. Repeated patterns are deliberate because learning is deliberate. If one warning didn't land, it repeats. If repetition didn't work, intensity increases. Not out of cruelty, but efficiency. The signal adjusts to your level of awareness. The more you ignore, the clearer it becomes. The clearer it becomes, the harder it is to pretend you don't know what's happening. There's a moment when a pattern stops feeling external and starts feeling internal. That's the turning point. That's when blame loses its grip and curiosity replaces defensiveness. You stop asking why this keeps happening and start asking what it's trying to teach you. That question changes everything. Patterns don't stop because you're tired of them. They stop when you respond differently. Not when you complain louder, not when you hope harder, but when you interrupt the script. A new boundary. A new reaction. A new decision that feels uncomfortable because it's unfamiliar. That's when the signal has done its job. Until then, the pattern remains patient. It doesn't rush. It doesn't give up. It waits for recognition because the goal was never to trap you. The goal was to wake you up to something you keep stepping over, something you keep explaining away, something that keeps returning not to haunt you, but to point directly at what you've been avoiding seeing all along. Silence can be louder than disaster, because disaster at least announces itself. It crashes in, breaks things, demands attention, gives you something obvious to react to. Silence doesn't do that. Silence waits. It stands still while you keep moving, pretending nothing is wrong. And that's why it's dangerous. Because when nothing is happening, people assume nothing is required of them. They relax their awareness. They stop listening. They convince themselves that calm means safety. Silence is not empty. It's loaded. It's what happens when warnings have already been sent and are now being withdrawn. Conversations stop. Opportunities pause. Doors don't slam. They simply don't open. You reach out and get no response. You expect resistance and get nothing. And that nothing starts echoing, louder than shouting, louder than chaos, because it leaves you alone with your thoughts. Instead of distracting you with damage, disaster gives people excuses. Something went wrong, something broke, something obvious happened. Silence removes excuses. There's no clear enemy, no visible conflict, no dramatic reason to panic. Just absence. And absence forces reflection. That's why people fear it more than disaster, even if they don't admit it. Silence asks questions you can't answer quickly. When silence arrives after repeated signals, it's deliberate. It's not neglect, it's restraint. Action has been paused to see what you'll do without pressure. Will you notice the stillness? Will you examine what stopped moving? Will you question why everything feels suspended? Or will you rush to fill the quiet with noise, distractions, excuses, anything to avoid sitting with the message? Silence exposes attachment. You realize how much you relied on constant feedback, reassurance, reaction. When that disappears, anxiety spikes. You replay past moments looking for meaning. You overthink. You doubt. Silence turns the volume up inside your head. And that internal noise is often louder than any external disaster. People say they want peace, but silence tests whether they can handle it. Peace without clarity feels unsettling. Silence without answers feels threatening. That's because silence removes control. You can't argue with it. You can't negotiate. You can't manipulate it. You either listen or you don't. And listening means facing the parts of yourself that disasters usually distract you from. Silence is often the final warning before consequence. Not because something bad is coming immediately, but because space has been created for choice. The system steps back. It stops intervening. It lets you move freely. And that freedom is heavy. Because now, whatever happens next is on you. No interference, no correction, just response. Disaster forces reaction. Silence invites responsibility. That's why silence feels heavier. In disaster, you react instinctively. In silence, you have to decide consciously. You have to notice patterns. You have to recognize what's missing and why. You have to confront the possibility that the absence is intentional. Silence also reveals priorities. What do you chase when nothing chases you? What do you fix when nothing is broken? Who do you reach for when no one calls? Silence strips away urgency and leaves intention exposed. It shows you whether you're driven by awareness or addiction to movement. There's a reason silence often follows repeated mistakes. Not because forgiveness ran out, but because intervention did. You were corrected, you were warned, you were redirected, and you kept moving the same way. Silence arrives to see if you'll stop on your own. It's not abandonment, it's observation. People often mistake silence for peace and keep walking. That's when it becomes louder than disaster, because disaster would have stopped them. Silence lets them continue thinking everything is fine until they are far enough down the wrong path that turning back costs more. That's the cruelty of misreading silence. Silence also tests faith. Not belief in outcomes, but belief in awareness. Can you trust what you sense without confirmation? Can you recognize a pause as a message instead of a gap? Can you stay still long enough to hear what isn't being said? When silence surrounds you, it's not the absence of sound, it's the presence of expectation. Something is being withheld, not to punish, but to observe your next move. Silence watches behavior without interference. It lets truth surface naturally. Disaster demands attention immediately. Silence waits for maturity. It doesn't chase you. It doesn't force understanding. It simply removes the noise and lets your choices echo back at you. And if you're not listening, that echo grows heavier with every step you take, because silence doesn't disappear on its own. It stays patient, observant, pressing against awareness until you finally realize that what's missing was never empty. It was speaking the whole time. Comfort blinds awareness because it teaches you how to sleep with your eyes open. Not real sleep, the dangerous kind, where everything looks fine and nothing feels urgent. You get used to how things are, not because they're good, but because they're familiar. Familiarity dulls curiosity. It softens red flags into background noise. It convinces you that stability is the same as safety, even when something underneath keeps feeling wrong. Comfort doesn't arrive loudly. It settles in quietly, rearranging priorities without asking permission. You stop questioning routines. You stop challenging patterns. You stop listening to that inner hesitation because nothing is technically broken. Bills are paid, people are present, life moves. And that movement becomes the excuse. If things are moving, they must be right. That's the lie comfort tells best. Awareness requires friction. It sharpens when something resists you, when something disrupts your expectations. Comfort removes that friction. It smooths everything out until you stop noticing details. You don't see the slow compromises you're making. You don't notice how often you swallow your instincts. You don't recognize how much of yourself you've muted to keep things easy. People think danger looks dramatic. It doesn't. It looks like routine. It looks like staying where you're tolerated because it's easier than being alone. It looks like repeating the same choices because they don't require courage. Comfort trains you to confuse ease with alignment. And once that confusion settles in, awareness starts fading. When you're comfortable, questions feel inconvenient. Why change something that isn't hurting badly enough? Why disrupt peace with uncertainty? Why look closer when surface-level calm is available? So you stop asking, and what you stop asking eventually stops answering. Comfort also makes you overconfident. You assume you'd notice if something was wrong. You assume awareness is automatic, but awareness is a skill, not a default. It requires attention, presence, and a willingness to feel discomfort. Comfort numbs that willingness. It convinces you that intuition can wait. That's how people miss warnings, not because they weren't sent, but because comfort filtered them out. The first warning feels small, easy to ignore. The second feels manageable. The third feels familiar. Comfort reframes repetition as normalcy. It says, "This is just how things are." And once that sentence settles in your mind, awareness is already compromised. Comfort creates blind spots. You don't see the slow erosion of standards. You don't notice how much you're tolerating. You don't recognize the cost because it's paid in small increments, one compromise at a time. one excuse at a time, nothing dramatic enough to trigger alarm. And the most dangerous part is how comfort rewards you for not looking deeper. It gives you predictability, routine, a sense of control. You know what tomorrow will look like. That predictability feels safe, even if it's quietly draining you. Awareness would disrupt that predictability, so comfort keeps it at bay. People often say they were blindsided when things fall apart. They weren't. They were comfortable. The signs were there, but comfort made them look harmless. The gut feelings came, but comfort labeled them overthinking. The pauses appeared, but comfort called them rest. Comfort also isolates awareness socially. When everyone around you accepts the same norms, the same habits, the same compromises, questioning them makes you feel dramatic, out of place. So you stay quiet. You adjust. You blend. Awareness doesn't disappear all at once. It gets crowded out by agreement. There's a reason growth feels uncomfortable, because it requires awareness to stay awake, to notice misalignment, to admit when something isn't working even if it's convenient. Comfort resists that. It tells you to wait, to settle, to not rock anything. The longer you stay comfortable, the harder awareness is to recover, because comfort rewires what you tolerate. It lowers the volume of intuition. It teaches you how to live with tension without addressing it. And eventually you don't feel the warning until it's loud enough to disrupt comfort itself. That's when people say it came out of nowhere. The collapse, the loss, the consequence. But awareness was blinded long before that. Comfort stood in front of it like a curtain, soft, familiar, convincing. Awareness doesn't thrive in ease, it thrives in honesty, in stillness, in moments where you choose to look closer, even when nothing is forcing you to. Comfort asks you to stay where you are. Awareness asks you to notice what staying is costing you. And every time you choose comfort over awareness, you trade short-term peace for long-term clarity. You delay realization. You postpone adjustment. You let patterns continue because they're not painful enough yet. Comfort doesn't attack you. It sedates you. It keeps you functional but disconnected. Moving but not observing. Surviving but not seeing. And by the time awareness tries to speak again, it has to shout through layers of routine, habit, and acceptance you've built around yourself, waiting for the moment when comfort finally cracks enough for you to realize how much you stopped noticing why everything felt fine. Intuition speaks before consequences because it doesn't need evidence, it only needs honesty. It arrives early, quietly, often at inconvenient moments, before logic can assemble excuses and before desire can dress itself up as reason. That uneasy feeling in your chest, that hesitation before a decision, that sudden clarity you ignore because it disrupts your plans, that's intuition doing its job. It's not dramatic, it doesn't beg. It simply shows up and waits to see if you respect it. Most people dismiss intuition because it doesn't explain itself. It doesn't come with charts, guarantees, or timelines. It just says something is off. And humans don't like off. They like certainty. So they override intuition with logic, with optimism, with hope, with other people's opinions. They tell themselves they're being negative, paranoid, dramatic. They confuse intuition with fear because both feel uncomfortable, even though fear screams and intuition whispers. Intuition always arrives before consequences because it's preventative, not reactive. Consequences clean up messes. Intuition tries to stop them from happening. That's why ignoring it feels harmless at first. Nothing bad happens immediately. Life keeps moving. People stay. Doors remain open. And that delay convinces you that intuition was wrong. It wasn't wrong. It was early. There's a pattern to how intuition gets ignored. First, you feel it. Then you rationalize it. Then you seek validation to override it. You ask people who don't have to live with the outcome. You collect opinions until one supports what you already want to do, and once you act against intuition, it goes quiet. Not gone, quiet. It steps back and lets the lesson continue without interference. People think intuition is loud when it's actually patient. It doesn't chase you. It doesn't argue. It doesn't force. It gives you space to choose. That space is mercy. But mercy has limits. When intuition is ignored long enough, consequences take over the conversation. And consequences don't whisper. Intuition often feels inconvenient because it interrupts comfort. It asks you to walk away when staying feels easier. It asks you to pause when momentum feels exciting. It asks you to say no when attention feels validating. And because it doesn't threaten you, you don't take it seriously. You think real danger would feel scarier. You forget that intuition is calm because it's confident. One of the biggest mistakes people make is waiting for intuition to repeat itself loudly. It doesn't work that way. Intuition gives you the signal once or twice, then it watches. It lets repetition become the teacher. The consequence becomes the echo of the intuition you ignored. That's why hindsight feels cruel. You say you knew it. You did. You just didn't listen when knowing still gave you options. Intuition speaks in timing. The pause that doesn't make sense. The delay that feels unnecessary. The sudden loss of interest that confuses you. The unexplained discomfort around something everyone else celebrates. Those moments aren't random. They're early warnings dressed as moods. And because moods are easy to dismiss, intuition hides there. People who ignore intuition often pride themselves on resilience. They believe they can handle whatever happens, and maybe they can. But handling consequences doesn't mean you were meant to experience them. Strength is not proof of alignment. Sometimes it's just proof that you survived something you didn't need to go through. Intuition also speaks through repetition of feeling, not events. The same unease in different situations. The same doubt with different people. The same inner resistance no matter how good things look on the surface. That's not negativity. That's pattern recognition happening internally before it shows up externally. The reason intuition comes before consequences is because it respects your freedom. It offers guidance without control. Consequences remove freedom. They narrow options. They force change. Intuition invites it. One preserves choice. The other enforces it. Ignoring intuition slowly disconnects you from yourself. You stop trusting that inner signal. You start outsourcing decisions. You rely on logic alone, then emotions alone, then urgency alone. And when consequences arrive, they feel sudden, unfair, shocking. But they were introduced quietly a long time ago. Intuition doesn't demand perfection. It doesn't expect you to always listen, but it does keep record. It remembers every time you chose convenience over clarity. And when the cost shows up, it doesn't say anything. It doesn't say, "I told you so." It lets reality explain what intuition already knew. People who learn to listen early avoid lessons others have to learn the hard way, not because they're lucky, but because they respect the signal before the noise. They understand that intuition is the first line of defense, not the last resort. And every time you ignore it, the volume of life increases. Not to punish you, but to replace what you refuse to hear. Intuition speaks first, because it trusts you to listen. Consequences speak later, because listening was postponed. And once consequences arrive, intuition doesn't disappear. It just watches quietly, knowing the lesson has already moved past. Warning and into experience, patience runs out before mercy, not because mercy is weak, but because patience has a purpose. It exists to give you time, not endless permission. Time to notice, time to adjust, time to stop pretending you don't understand what's being shown to you. Mercy creates space. Patience measures how you use it. And when that space is wasted, patience doesn't explode, it expires. People misunderstand patience. They think it means tolerance without limits, forgiveness without memory, delay without consequence. It doesn't. Patience watches behavior, not promises. It observes patterns, not intentions. Every repeated choice is noted. Every ignored warning is recorded. Not emotionally, but accurately. Patience is calm because it's confident. It knows outcomes don't need to be rushed. Mercy feels gentle, so people assume it lasts forever. They mistake kindness for permission. They think silence means approval. They think delay means escape. That's how patience gets tested, not by mistakes, but by repetition. One wrong step can be corrected. Walking the same wrong path over and over is a decision. Patience allows error. It doesn't tolerate defiance disguised as ignorance. When someone keeps choosing the same thing after being shown the cost, patience begins to thin, not dramatically, quietly. Opportunities stop appearing. Doors don't open as easily. Support feels distant, and people blame luck, timing, others, anything but their own refusal to respond. Mercy is offered early. It cushions consequences. It softens impact. It gives you room to grow without being crushed by the weight of your own decisions. Patience watches what you do with that mercy. Do you reflect? Do you change? Do you slow down? Or do you treat mercy like immunity? There's a difference between falling and refusing to stand up. Patience understands falling. It waits while you gather yourself. But when you choose to stay down because getting up would require effort, honesty, or discomfort, patience starts stepping back, not to punish, but to let reality speak louder than restraint. People often think consequences mean mercy has disappeared. It hasn't. Mercy simply stops blocking the lesson. It removes the padding. It lets the impact land so understanding can finally happen. That's not cruelty. That's efficiency. Mercy without growth becomes enablement. Patience running out doesn't look like anger. It looks like neutrality. The help you expected doesn't arrive. The escape route you relied on isn't there. The familiar forgiveness doesn't reset the situation. And suddenly, the weight of choice becomes unavoidable. Patience is generous with time, not infinite with tolerance. It gives warnings in different forms: discomfort, repetition, delays, intuition, silence. Each one is an extension of mercy. Each one is a chance to respond before escalation. Ignoring them isn't bravery, it's avoidance. There's a moment when patience shifts into consequence. Not abruptly, but decisively. The lesson stops being optional. The environment changes. Circumstances tighten. And people say everything fell apart at once. It didn't. It unfolded exactly as long as patience allowed. Mercy doesn't cancel responsibility, it postpones the bill. And postponed bills collect interest. The longer you rely on mercy instead of growth, the heavier the cost becomes when patience ends. Not because you're being punished, but because you delayed learning. People who abuse mercy often believe they're special. That rules bend for them. That grace means exemption. Patience disproves that belief slowly. It waits until the evidence is undeniable, until excuses run out, until parents speak for themselves. Patience running out isn't a loss of love. It's a shift in method. The lesson moves from suggestion to experience. Words become events. Warnings become outcomes. And what was once gentle becomes unavoidable. The quietest moment is right before patience ends. That pause where everything feels suspended, where nothing is happening but everything is about to. That's the final space for awareness, the last chance to choose differently without force. Most people miss that moment because they assume patience means safety. They relax instead of reflect. They delay instead of decide. And when consequences arrive, they feel shocked, even though they were announced repeatedly through restraint. Patience doesn't disappear. It concludes. It finishes its role. And when it does, mercy doesn't vanish either. It changes shape. It becomes the lesson itself. The experience you didn't want but needed. The clarity that only arrives when choice is no longer theoretical. Patience runs out before mercy because mercy's goal is understanding, not comfort. And once understanding can no longer be achieved gently, patience steps aside and lets reality do what restraint was holding back, not out of anger, but out of respect for the lesson you kept postponing. Choice determined the next outcome, not intention, not hope, not what you meant to do. Meaning doesn't move reality, action does. You can want better, believe better is coming, talk about better with convincing emotion, but none of that changes the direction you're walking. Choice is quiet like that. It doesn't announce importance. It just redirects momentum. And momentum doesn't care how sincere you feel while standing still. People like to think outcomes are complicated, that there are too many variables to track. That belief makes it easier to avoid accountability. But when you strip everything down, outcomes follow decisions the same way shadows follow movement. You step one way, the shadow shifts. You step another, it changes again. No drama, no judgment, just cause and effect moving at its own pace. Most people don't fear bad outcomes. They fear owning the choices that lead to them. So they focus on circumstances instead. Timing, other people, luck. Anything that feels external. Choice feels too close, too personal. Because if choice determines outcome, then awareness matters. And awareness demands responsibility. Every choice you make votes for the future you'll have to live in. Not in one dramatic election, but in small, repetitive ballots. You barely notice who you answer, who you ignore, what you tolerate, what you delay, what you repeat even when you know better. Those choices stack quietly, building